We are more than just accountants. We are business advisors, taxation consultants, and strategists that specialise in setting up businesses. We understand the client and give them the very best customised advice and strategies to achieve their goals. Visit our website dkpco.com.au or give us a call today on 03 9023 9370. Fast, proactive, personal. That's DKP & Co Chartered Accountants.
Ever wanted a career in football? From TV deals to player transfers, football is now a global multi-billion-dollar industry in need of qualified professionals who know the sport inside and out. Brought to you by the Global Institute of Sport, the Masters of Football Business is delivered by experts from Australia and around the world. Learn online with unique access to networking and guest speaker events at the iconic MCG. Be one of the first Australians to get a football master's degree. Apply now to start in February 2022. Learn more at gis.sport/FNR. gis.sport/FNR.
Sometimes I feel, I don't know.
Buona giornata, buona serata, buona giornata.
There's not really time to relax and take an espresso for Juventus.
You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? Attaccare!
Attaccare. That's the motto of this show, the Euro Show here on FNR. Welcome back, all of our viewers and listeners, to 2022. We are back with a full suite of shows kicking off again this week. The first thing you'll probably notice is I am not Nick Debano. He will be back next week. Filling in his stead is the very capable, erudite, expert on all things European football, Mr. Ante Jukic on the Zoom. How are you, Ante?
I would neither call myself erudite or expert, but I hope to have some fun. Hello, Josh. Hello, everyone. It's fun to be here. Let's get to it.
Well, on the rundown today, we're going to talk about Real Madrid's convincing win over Valencia and their commanding position in La Liga's title charge. We're going to talk about Barcelona. We're going to talk about Bayern Munich's shock, loss to Gladbach, which they don't lose too many Bundesliga games, but they did have a few players unavailable for that one. We've got to talk about Ajdin Hrustić and his progression at Eintracht Frankfurt. He actually played 90 minutes, would you believe, plus stoppages in their game against Dortmund. But first, we're going to start in Italy, as this show often does. It's been the league that's delivered in spades, and attaccare is the word of the day. Roma 3, Juventus 2, a red card, a penalty miss, a capitulation. Mourinho with his arms outstretched in disbelief. This one had absolutely everything, didn't it?
It was Juventus 4, Roma 3, by the way.
Did I get the score wrong? My apologies. Roma 3, Juventus 4. I was struggling to keep track of the bloody score. But yes, De Sciglio with the winner. A penalty miss from Pellegrini after De Ligt was red carded for his handball, which could have made it 4-4, but it wasn't to be for Roma. Nothing seems to go right for this team. How much longer does Mourinho have in charge of this stuttering side, which seems to have minor breakthroughs and then be back to square one?
Look, speaking of Nick Debano, he and I were kind of aligned on this when we were previewing at the very start of the Serie A season, that Roma were going to be like this. They were going to sputter. They weren't going to, let's say, find a savior in Jose Mourinho. Outside of Mourinho's implementation being not necessarily optimal for, how Serie A is played nowadays. The squad itself isn't exactly optimal either, and nor is it really balanced. And that was the thing about the game itself. I think it had more to do with Dybala having his best possible partner in play coming on the pitch and the match turning from there then it had to do with, Roma, being, let's say disastrous. Once Dybala and Morata get to play together, it's some of the best play in Serie A. In terms of interplay, it's up there with, let's say, Brozovic, Dzeko levels for Inter. Like, it's just so much fun to watch Morata and Dybala. But like, it was funny to see Kulusevski's goal, and it was such a great encapsulation of Morata. Morata was so involved in the build-up. You were able to get into the penalty area as a consequence of Morata's movement, and when the time came to actually finish the chance, Morata scuffs it completely. And fortuitously for Kulusevski, he ends up, it does fall to him so he can finish. But it was just such a nice little picture.
You know what, Ante? I hate to interrupt you mid-spiel, but I think I've worked out why you love Morata so much, why he has such a soft spot for you. It's because he is technically brilliant, very skillful, very intelligent on the field, and fragile of temperament. He's spiritually from the Balkans.
You know what? I've said this in private circles, but Spain is like if the Balkans had a larger population. Just from a bureaucratic standpoint, rampant corruption, football, a fine balance between romanticism and brute force. But they kind of lean towards the brute force too much, or more than what they would like themselves to believe. But yeah, I love Alvaro Morata so much, irrespective of his fallibilities in front of goal. He's still going to allow the team to get into good positions because of what he does as a striker. And yeah, him and Morata, him and Dybala together are really fun to watch. Probably, not as great as what could have been with Higuain and Dybala before, Ronaldo came to Juve and, put that through the ringer. But yeah, it's a shame to see that they have such a poor collective around them, even though it's Juve, and I hate Juve, but Dybala and Morata, they're just fun to watch.
Where does this leave Mourinho? I mean, surely his contract is simply too lucrative for Roma to consider departing with him at this early stage. There's been every drama of a usual 2-year Mourinho tenure packed into the space of 6 months, it seems to me.
But the thing about Roma, irrespective of, let's say, the ceiling of this project, they've never had any continuity or consistency with any project whatsoever. Coming back to when they brought Monchi in as their sporting director, and binned him after a season, they went one way with Fonseca. Roma didn't necessarily, stay the course. And irrespective of ceiling with Mourinho, it would at least present a change in tact from Roma if they would at least try to with Mourinho. If there really is a league in which he might best suit, this is definitely not, the Premier League or, the Bundesliga. You might be best in international football when you really think about it, irrespective of his own, preferences and, desires as a club trainer and the need to be there in the day-to-day and week to week. But yeah, I think I just want to see consistency from Roma in this respect, because they've been so volatile, and they don't have a great squad. They don't have a great squad, but even if they had a good squad, I'm not sure if Mourinho would actually get the best out of it. That all being said,
it's interesting to me that he's turned to so many sort of ex-Premier League players and even English players in this side. Chris Smalling signing Tammy Abraham, or Abraham as Mourinho tends to call him. I remember bit of his punditry during Frank Lampard's first season in charge of Chelsea. It turned out to only be a season and a half that he lasted. But that first season where Chelsea had a transfer ban and Mourinho was railing against Lampard for starting Abraham ahead of Giroud against Manchester United. And he said, if Abraham is starting, it is not a real season. It's not a real season, meaning that Lampard, given that he had the transfer ban, could basically finish anywhere and still keep his job. He resented Lampard for blooding youth. But instead, he's actually put stock in Abraham, and he's been one of the few bright lights in Roma's campaign so far. He's actually scoring quite freely in Serie A.
He actually, like, you think about the two players who received the most scope under Lampard at Chelsea. One was Mason Mount, the other is Tammy Abraham, and they've both progressed to be really good players in their own rights and not only good players in their own rights, but flexible players. That's actually one cool thing about Serie A at the moment. And, it's not the undisputed best league in the world like it was in the 80s and 90s, which was like the motivation for a lot of English players coming out, or players from the English First Division, because, we're not going to count the likes of Ian Rush as English. But it's really cool to see English players moving to the continent, and the likes of Tammy Abraham, the likes of Fikayo Tomori, Chris Smalling was one of the pioneers in that respect, at least in a modern sense. It's cool to see English players in the continent, and this was the one thing that was always kind of lamentable with the English First Division or the Premier League, because the wage was so lucrative. It created a lack of incentive or motivation for English players to leave, for the continent. And then, it's cool that they're looking for game time instead of being content with, rather sizable wages.
On the Juventus side of things, outside of that Dybala-Morata partnership, which is bearing fruit whenever it's given an opportunity to shine, have Juventus and has Max Allegri found balance in the rest of the unit? Because he seemed to be experimenting with a lot of different lineups, a lot of different midfields, different formations. It was a bit Ranieri-esque from Allegri, who isn't afraid of a bit of tinkering himself.
Yeah, this season he has had shades of the Tinkerman, but I think he'll get time, which is, I think, allowing him to, let's say, figure it all out with respect to the squad. Speaking of volatility and speaking of instability with respect to, club projects, like Juve have been another shining example of that ever since they've signed Ronaldo. It's just a debilitative lack of patience with respect to coaches. And I think time is a luxury, but I think Allegri might have made that a certain proviso as part of him coming to Juve again. And the fact that he even was approached to come back to Juve was, could prove to be, could allow him a certain leverage. But it's stuff like McKennie on the wing, not really having any continuity between the likes of Locatelli, Bentancur, McKennie himself, even Artur, who came on late in the second half, or in the second half against Roma this morning. Kulusevski playing very different positions. The only certainty, I guess, is just the fact that Ramsey won't play, and it's just so regrettable that Aaron Ramsey's potentially utopian voyage to Italy hasn't ended up in the manner it could have been. I'm a huge fan of Aaron Ramsey. I've always loved watching him. And even when he was at Arsenal, I remember saying to friends, in discussion with friends, how good would it be to watch Aaron Ramsey in the Serie A? If there is one player that's perfect for Serie A, it would be Aaron Ramsey. And it's just it just hasn't worked out. And like, he would have been perfect mid-table Serie A excellence.
I share your admiration for the guy. I remember his run to the FA Cup final with Cardiff City as a youngster, and everyone was calling him the next Ryan Giggs. He ended up being a very different player to Giggsy, but I was absolutely sick at the time that Arsenal got there ahead of Manchester United for his signature, because I think he could have won quite a few trophies before Fergie left the club. Anyway, Aaron Ramsey's tale maybe now mirrors that of his Welsh international teammate, Gareth Bale, stuck on huge wages, a club that can't shift him but definitely won't play him. And it's a bit of a sad end or tail end to both players' careers. Such talent at their disposal. I mean, Ramsey maybe the more tantalising one given his intelligence on the pitch, but Gareth Bale, I mean, capable of such brilliance. And the fact that we don't see either of them when they're only in their early 30s is a tragedy, really.
Yeah, and it's not only a tragedy to see what wages have done to them, but what the feasibility of wages have done with respect to their careers, but how injuries have, played a part in that question of feasibility with both players. And you think about the levels that they were at around 2016. They were extraordinary players in their own rights, and watching both players, especially for Wales, and you see the kinds of players that they are, the magnitude of their talent, and it's going to be rather unfortunate to see Aaron Ramsey probably go back to Newcastle this month.
You know what I blame? The game of golf. I'd say it should be banned. Clearly the cause of these injuries, and
a waste of fine parkland.
A good walk spoiled. Go listen to that Malcolm Gladwell podcast if you haven't, and F golf. So, looking at the Serie A table, I think it's a pretty fair reflection of the quality of the team so far. Certainly the top four. Inter sitting pretty after another win this morning. So consistent in a world ravaged by COVID and so many, instabilities of our current moment, Ante. It's really nice to have something to hold on to, and Inter winning seems to be the only consistency that you can find in Serie A, which is so... it's so counter to their reputation that they've built up over the years as the perpetual chokers and bridesmaids.
As someone who's supported Milan even as a kid, do you realise how much it pisses me off to watch Brozovic and Dzeko play so well? And like, speaking of that interplay between two players that is so telepathic, so transformative, so collaborative for everyone else, when you look at how Çalhanoğlu and Barella are able to play in the way they do and maximize what they do, it's because of Brozovic and Dzeko. And, speaking of, that Serie A preview, and people were talking about Inter losing Hakimi and Lukaku. And we were adamant, like, Inter did not lose their best player. And I think it's about time that people recognise Marcelo Brozovic as the best defensive midfielder in the world.
Ahead of Casemiro?
Yeah. I think they're the only two players that have played consistently at such a level in a single pivot.
Conventional Prem wisdom would come for you now and say N'Golo Kante.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, Declan Rice.
I wasn't saying Rice. I was saying Kante. He's built up such a reputation for himself, but Kante doesn't really play as a six anymore.
No, he doesn't.
I'm not sure if he ever really did. He was more of a defensive eight, if such a thing exists.
No, that's true. But you look, you think about Brozovic. Brozovic doesn't necessarily play as a six either. Like, he goes into positions where other DMs would get nosebleeds. He's asking for the ball around the penalty area, and he's so transformative. But and I'll admit I wasn't the biggest fan of his initially, but to see the season. The improvement that he's made season upon season once Spalletti moved him, to the base of midfield at Inter in 2016, it's just been extraordinary to see the rate of progression that he's made. and how he's great, like on a weekly basis, and especially for players like Barella and Çalhanoğlu. And Barella is almost like an Italian version of Mason Mount in terms of his, where he likes to receive the ball, where he likes to penetrate with his movement. And as well as Çalhanoğlu, who doesn't really like doing the heavy lifting in early phases of play. And, it kind of maximizing his final ball, that's what's so compatible with Brozovic and Dzeko playing together, as well as someone who can press like a maniac in Lautaro Martinez, or even Tucu Correa for Inter when he sees minutes under Simone Inzaghi. The only question I have is how Dzeko can maintain this over the course of the season, and that was always the lingering question with Inter. But we're almost at the end of January now, and he's still playing at a pretty extraordinary level on a consistent basis. So there's enough evidence to maybe suggest that they'd be able to see this out to the end of the season.
Lukaku coming to the Premier League and having all sorts of issues with Tuchel and with fitting into the system and so forth. It seems to suggest
playing with suffocating midfielders apart from Ante.
It seems to suggest that Inter got the better of this deal after all. A huge fee and replacing him with a free transfer. I mean, this is unbelievable for Inter.
And you have to consider Inter's financial situation as well.
This was a transfer of necessity. They wouldn't have given up Lukaku if they absolutely didn't have to, but it's worked out amazingly for them.
But you think about it. If the Sunni group wasn't hemorrhaging money, they could have got Lukaku for even more.
It was the negotiating position that killed them, really.
Yeah, exactly. They were victims of leverage in that respect, and that also applied to Hakimi. But yeah, and this is coming back to that. There was a relative level of sustainability. If they sold Brozovic or they let Brozovic go, Inter would collapse, and that could still apply if they don't renew Brozovic, Inter should be throwing the kitchen sink at him, quite simply. There is no defensive midfielder in the world who consistently plays at the level of Brozovic, and that they're in front already. Especially with the backdrop of AFCON and Napoli and Milan, they're two biggest competitors for the title this season, at least in my opinion, being significantly affected by that. Inter are in good position to already be at the top of the table this early in January.
Comment coming through from televisual_picture, praying for an Aaron Ramsey A-Liga swan song. You and me both, mate. Actually, there's only one place in Australian football for Aaron Ramsey, and that is gracing Gardeners Creek Reserve. Get him to the Eastern Lions, baby. Honour that Welsh heritage.
You know what? I will say, I have like a proud dad kind of, emotion, knowing that A-Liga has become part of the vernacular in Australian soccer.
It's not the first word you've added to the discourse.
But Aaron Ramsey in the flesh would be pretty awesome. However, coming back to Inter Lazio are a tire fire. I cannot fathom how Sarri can continue playing Tomabasic in Luis Alberto's spot. Like, coming into this weekend, Lazio were just about in the top 10 in the top 5 leagues for possession per match, averaging possession per match. And they're in the, almost the bottom 10 for shots per 90. And then, you look at the difference in shot quantity and quality when Luis Alberto isn't on the pitch. It's pretty stark. And how reliant they are on his movement, his ability to deliver a final ball. So everything has to be viewed within that prism, and the change system that Sarri has implemented, because there are a lot of players in Lazio's squad that are kind of incompatible to a 4-3-3.
Why has Sarri done this? Has he given up cigarettes for the new year and lost his mind, or?
No, but he's no different to a lot of mono coaches who are adherent to system and are inflexible to the players they have, because it allows them to implement structures and patterns that they've created, and they don't really want to stray from that. And I think, that's why, let's say, when coaches come in, they like to buy players who they feel can fit, that formation or system. You look at, let's say, a Ciro Immobile or an Acerbi, like Immobile as a single striker up front, just he can't play with his back to goal. And for example, but at the same time, it was like I was watching that game, and it was the one shot they had for the half. Immobile scores from a broken phase of play. I was thinking they can't get away with this. But yeah, you
can't keep getting away with it.
Seriously, man. And not just that, but the manner in which he stat pads as well, the penalties he scores, he goes for the goals he scores for Lazio while Lazio are in winning positions. Even when he was under Inzaghi, this was kind of evident. But yeah, I don't think Lazio is I don't think Luis Alberto is the root cause of Lazio's problems here.
Ante, I have to say, one observation from this game, ever since the days of Sinisa Mihajlovic, I've always been a sucker for a defender with a sweet left peg. And Inter have two of them. This is not even fair. They've got Bastoni, who scored an absolute bomb this morning, and Di Marco as well, the master of the set piece. This team has so many things to like, and one of them is the curious habit of Serie A teams picking up, Kolarov-type players that just have this ridiculous left peg on the left of a back three. It's one of my favourite sights in football to see the centre-back lining one up from 25 metres and having a realistic chance of scoring.
And it's not only that, but they also have Perisic as a wing-back who can also deliver from wide positions. And so it allows, something that's been pretty distinct with Inter, it allows their centre-backs to bomb on in the same way that, that Atalanta's centre-backs do. And, there are a lot of, let's say, stylistic or structural familiarities that you'll see, in respective 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 setups with Gasperini's Atalanta and Inzaghi's teams and Conte's teams as well. But yeah, it maximizes their ability to ping a ball, like all three of those players. And especially when Di Marco comes on, let's say as a sub, you can play.
Cut to a quick... Oh, we're back. Sorry, I lost the last bit of your answer there, Ante. Audio just cut out there for a second. A few teething issues on our return to the studio. Can you just repeat that last bit again?
We'll do it live. What I will say, the fact that all three players can deliver a ball allows them to, let's say, maximize what they have, within the confines of those patterns and structures that Inter play within in that 3-5-2. They're a really good team to watch. But the thing is, watching Inter, watching Napoli, Milan, Atalanta, the cool thing about Serie A is that it's competitive. But the drawback is whether they can go against stronger teams in Europe as a consequence of that.
Sometimes having an exciting domestic league comes at the expense of continental success.
Especially in the hyper-concentrated world of Europe's football elite.
Then again, I guess Bayern's excuse was always the reverse, that they were so checked out by the time the round of 16 rolled around, they weren't match fit or something, beating up on, tiny little towns that no one's ever heard of. Let's hit one more topic before we leave Italy, and that's the departure of players for the African Nations Cup. I think you and I are in lockstep here that
Happy F1 everyone, by the way.
Yes, international football is the superior football and means more, and players should always be given the chance to play for their countries. Sadly, this is not an attitude shared by the European Clubs Association, who really tried to cancel the tournament on AFCON's behalf, on CAF's behalf rather, and it's not the case with some clubs, including the Pozzo-owned Watford, not releasing Emmanuel Dennis for Nigeria duty because of maybe an administrative detail. They weren't notified 15 days in advance. Milan and Napoli, meanwhile, have been decimated by these call-ups. How do you see the next month going for both sides? Who is most affected, and can they keep in touching distance of Inter through this lean period?
I would say it's Milan. Because Milan's, arguably most important players, irrespective of, Tonali, improving his level and consistency, this is specifically this season. The fact that they are losing Kessié and Benased, for a squad that has been built off, the flexibility of its midfield and, the consistency of that midfield, it's going to be really interesting to see how they go without those two pieces. And that was something that we kind of saw last season, especially when Benased, was out for an extended period of time with injury. And it seemed kind of fitting that immediately once Benased and Kessié are gone, like Theo Hernandez, he gets his name on the score sheet against Venezia. Osimhen would be a big loss for anyone, but the fact that Fabian Ruiz came back from injury this weekend, with Napoli getting up against Sampdoria, I think that would hold them in relatively good stead in comparison to Milan. This month, especially with Inter, playing like a steam train right now, to be honest. It's a matter of treading water this month. And if they can do that, then possibly they can push Inter to the end of the season, especially in a league where the league winner might not break 85 points this season. So it's important for them to tread water this month.
This will be Lorenzo Insigne's swan song as well. It really turned heads, this transfer to Toronto FC in Major League Soccer. And, he joins another diminutive Italian favourite in Sebastian Giovinco, who was dropped from the national team when he transferred to MLS. Have times changed? Can Lorenzo Insigne maintain his Azzurri spot once he heads over to Canada on July 1st?
I'm frankly unsure. I'm not going to say he doesn't warrant a call-up just on the basis of talent, because he absolutely is one of Italy's best players. What I will say is, considering the wages he was offered at Toronto, he'd be silly not to jump at it, irrespective of, the stature that he holds at Napoli and in Italian football as a whole. At the same time, though, you look at players like, going on from that, look at, LA Galaxy offering rather sizable money to Teshi Savonier as well. And for someone who is, around the same age and is of a similar profile, you can look, you can kind of see a strategic element to, talent acquisition in the MLS. But coming back to Italy, I think something that might be of more concern immediately is Chiesa going down, especially with with a qualification playoff coming up this month.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. This injury to Chiesa this morning seems quite serious. It could knock on wood, the dreaded 3 letters that we don't mention in relation to the knee. But how do Italy replicate what he brings, or can they? Because he's such a sort of frenzied attacking force, whether he's deployed off the bench or from the start of the game. He really starred in the Euros. He's a divisive player, I guess, amongst fans, because sometimes he, that kind of energy that he brings is ill spent running into blind alleys and losing the ball, but also the kind of desperation to get on the end of things and score goals, is one of those underrated qualities that isn't always reflected in the stat sheet. So I think he is a big loss in a playoff tie.
I will say Chiesa is a complementary piece with respect to Italy, but he's nevertheless an important piece because he provides an important counterpoint. The fact that Verratti is, now seeing consistent minutes is pivotal for them, because without Verratti, Italy crumbles. That he is seeing minutes will be very important for them going forward in looking ahead of this qualification playoff, unless he gets injured over the next couple of weeks or so, which, knowing Marco Verratti's extensive injury history, might be possible. Touch wood that it doesn't happen, because on his day he's one of the top 3 midfielders in the world, and it was looking back to that Euro and that Euro triumph, it was Italy's level over the course of games was dependent on whether Verratti was on the pitch. Even going back to when they started under Mancini in the UEFA Nations League, where, again, Verratti was injured and there was a lot of dysfunction. It's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, with that, I think we'll go to a break before this becomes the Italian football hour, and we'll migrate over to Germany, where Bayern have finally dropped some points, which makes the Bundesliga at least semi-interesting. And we've got an Australian getting some minutes for Eintracht Frankfurt, which is very much exciting, heading into some very important games for the Socceroos. That coming up on the other side of this break here on FNR Football Nation Radio. It's the Euro Show with Josh Parrish and Ante Jukic.
Ever wanted a career in football? From TV deals to player transfers, football is now a global multi-billion-dollar industry in need of qualified professionals who know the sport inside and out. Brought to you by the Global Institute of Sport, the Masters of Football Business is delivered by experts from Australia and around the world. Learn online with unique access to networking and guest speaker events at the iconic MCG. Be one of the first Australians to get a football master's degree. Apply now to start in February 2022. Learn more at gis.sport/FNR. gis.sport/FNR.
Since 1998, Lanco Group has been providing superior civil engineering solutions and advice to developers, local government and service authorities across Australia. Lanco Group is known for delivering sustainable, efficient solutions. By working closely with clients, Lanco Group is able to meet the complex infrastructure requirements for residential, commercial and industrial developments on time, on budget. Find out more at lancogroup.com.au. Lanco Group, your business partner for engineering solutions.
Launch your global career in football business. Study a master's degree online with unique access to the MCG and a big-hitting Australian industry network. Brought to you by the Global Institute of Sport, who also have campuses at the iconic Wembley Stadium in London and Etihad Stadium in Manchester. Be one of the first Australians to get a football master's degree and join GIS's global network of football leaders. Apply now to start in February 2022. Learn more at gis.sport/FNR. That's gis.sport/FNR.
Are you looking to change your destiny in life? Be your own boss? Start your own business? If you are, you need people who understand your needs and are committed to helping you make it happen. At DKP & Co Chartered Accountants, we are more than just accountants. We are business advisors, taxation consultants, and strategists that specialise in setting up businesses. We understand the client and give them the very best customised advice and strategies to achieve their goals. Visit our website dkpco.com.au or give us a call today on 03 9023 9370. Fast, proactive, personal. That's DKP & Co Chartered Accountants.
Sometimes I feel, I don't know.
Buona giornata, buona serata, buona giornata.
There's not really time to relax and take an espresso for Juventus.
You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? Attaccare!
A big welcome back to the Euro Show here on FNR Football Nation Radio. Josh Parrish and Ante Jukic turning our attention now to Deutschland, where Bayern Munich have finally dropped some points in the Bundesliga. A few unfamiliar names on this team sheet, I have to say. 13 players out with combined AFCON call-ups and COVID cases and injuries and so forth. But Mark Rocker doesn't ring a bell. Malik Tillman. Bueller. I'm not getting any response from these names. Not ringing a bell. So
you know what? It was kind of it was. I will say it was satisfying to see the darlings of analytics Twitter in Mark Roca and Jamal Musiala dropping absolute stinkers despite having Lewandowski and Muller in front of them. Even the manner in which Bayern scored the opening goal was just outrageous in terms of degree of difficulty. Muller piercing that 15 meter pass in, Lewandowski kind of coming to and dropping in to receive that pass at the last second, that touch forward on the turn, and then, the finish on the run after everything that had transpired was just the mark of the best striker in the world. But this has always been the question of Bayern, how reliant will they be on Lewandowski and Muller, and how transformative they are in terms of movement? Because Muller, I've never seen an attacker specifically direct traffic for midfielders in the way that Muller does. I've never seen it. It's always, let's say the midfielder from deep who's receiving the ball, kind of orchestrating play. Muller's like, I got this, man. Like he'll be already a good 15 to 20 meters in front of the ball and directing where other players should go. It's the most unique thing I've seen, like, especially for German players and the German in the Bundesliga, which is just, the Premier League light, or which isn't exactly enjoyable from a standpoint of personal preference. But
hence one of his lesser-known nicknames when he was coming up, even through the youth teams, was Radio Muller, because he was always broadcasting where his teammates should be. Couldn't shut him up. I don't know if you've heard that one before, but he's a space interpreter, but also a broadcaster.
Friend of the show, Thomas Muller.
I would listen to a Thomas Muller podcast. Honestly, even if it was in German, I'd probably still listen.
He's you just see his mannerisms. He just strikes as like distinctly German. But I will say, despite the overwhelming conservatism that is applied to midfielders in the Bundesliga, it was fun to see Florian Neuhaus play and have an impact in this game, which is traditionally one of the bigger rivalries in the Bundesliga. Gladbach Bayern, that's a huge game, especially coming from the 70s when both teams were dominant, at least in domestic terms. So like it was one of the games that I kind of really circled, despite all the absences for Bayern. And I think despite the result for Gladbach against in Munich, you kind of have to take it with a pinch of salt, considering the absences for Bayern.
There's a moment in the 1990 World Cup film, one of those FIFA films. It was an invaluable resource for me when we were doing our World Cup retrospective podcast, Mundial Memories, the podcast, the playlist on our on our SoundCloud rather. If you want to have a listen back to those, they're timeless. But there's a moment where a sort of compilation of Germany's group stage exploits set to Night of the Valkyries, dun, 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 dun. And that's the song that plays in my head every time I see Thomas Muller basically doing anything on a football field. It's a sort of inevitable blood and thunder. He's just click. He's great. I just love him so much. And you speak about Musiala. Talk about anonymous performances. I mean, he even had the wrong name printed on his jersey. I don't know if you saw this, but he had Corentin Toliso's surname on the back of his shirt. So maybe he was trying to get away with a stinker by misidentifying himself.
Speaking of anonymous, however, if we're going to pivot to another game in Germany, what do you think of Jude Bellingham?
Jude Bellingham. I think I don't think he runs the game, but I do enjoy watching him. I think he's a good dribbler in midfield. I think he's got good technical ability. I think he can score goals and get into the box. I don't think he's the transformative force that England's midfield has been crying out for, to suddenly make them dominate the ball and do it in a way that plays through teams that set up in front of them. I think he's a complementary piece to a midfield that could go on to be something special, but not the kind of changing of the guard that everybody was hoping for, unfortunately.
Yeah, or that at least English football or analytics Twitter, which can be grossly wrong in certain terms of certain takes, perceive him to be. I think, he's very much a late entry into the box kind of player. And the thing about Dortmund, you start to realise just how important or how much they've changed ever since De Hood has come into the team. Last season after Favre was dismissed essentially. They're a far different team with Mahmoud Dahoud in midfield, and it allows Bellingham to get into certain spaces. That's why it was kind of a shame to see Frankfurt give up the game in the way they did with Bellingham and Dahoud scoring the equaliser and winner respectively, because I've been clamouring for the Jukic Hrustić midfield for Eintracht, and it's just it's football isn't fair sometimes. Especially after Hinteregger's era for the Europol, that kind of gives Dortmund the momentum straight after Jukic comes on for Sebastian Oder. But yeah, it's if seeing enough of Glasner at Wolfsburg, he won't take to that too kindly. I don't think we'll see much of the Hrustić-Jukic partnership going forward from here, unfortunately.
The time when Bellingham comes alive is after Dortmund have lost the ball and then they win it back.
Yeah.
It's sort of counter on a counter, cock-up cascade, I suppose.
He thrives in broken passages.
And that's a quality that he shares in a lot of ways with Erling Haaland. So those two are sort of a match made in heaven.
Haaland's, what? I like... Haaland's like a Lukaku. Haaland is Lukaku. Haaland's a Lukaku region. He's got really intuitive movement. Not the greatest player technically, but has such fury in his shot and finishing. I think they're very similar, and not just in terms of profile, but where they like to receive the ball in the penalty area and the consequent possibility that they will finish chances with respect to where they receive the ball in the penalty area, because that's always been a distinct thing about Lukaku. And I kind of get the impression that that's happening with Haaland as well.
Are both players mischaracterized because of their stature?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
They're so big and so imposing, you think they're going to be target men, not in the sense of being a presence off crosses, but in the old-fashioned sense of having the ball played into you. And that's a situation where neither player really excels.
Yeah, that's right. Because they are so mobile for their size, they'll like to play off, leak out. And that was something that, where Lukaku was very compatible at Inter, where he was allowed to leak out all the way to the right, or to Inter's right, incorporate the likes of Barella, Hakimi. And he doesn't really have that kind of freedom at Chelsea. Whereas at Dortmund, at Dortmund, Haaland plays in a very similar way. He's not one to, to use the expression, have a defender on his shoulder and ask for the ball to feet. Like, he's not doing that. He's going to come out and, and see if the centre-back follows him, or he's going to try and dart in behind.
He's the ultimate don't let him turn player.
Quite frankly.
Stay on his back.
Yeah.
So many strikers struggle with that. And it makes me wonder whether more teams should play with two up front to alleviate that burden.
Yeah.
Because we've become so used to these front threes and single striker systems.
See, and that's kind of where you saw around 2017, 2016, where more teams started playing with three at the back. I got the impression then that we were going to see more, striker, two-man striker partnerships up forward. And we still really haven't kind of gotten to that point yet. And that's actually been kind of interesting to see.
So just to recap on the Hrustić situation, do you expect him to start often in this run of games for Frankfurt now that we're back from the winter hiatus, or was this a one-off, a flash in the pan for?
Well, you think about it, Djibril Sow is unavailable. Paciencia is also unavailable. Jukic only just came back from having from a COVID period, or he had COVID, so he was out for a couple of weeks. You kind of have to view it all within the prism of COVID, frankly, doing a number on the whole of Europe at the moment. And it's to kind of put it as a silver lining to a cloud, there might be scope for Hrustić in that respect, especially considering there was talk of a transfer to to outside of the Bundesliga coming into this January. But some consistency would be nice, and some continuity would be nice for Ajdin Hrustić, because he is, he's a good midfielder for that level. Like, for me, he always struck as an Australian answer to Rodrigo de Paul, and and it's not just the eye test that shows up in the numbers. Like, I had a look at the numbers, and I was astounded just how similar they were in that respect as well. This is a player who should be starting in a team in the top five, but Glasner is a terrorist in that respect, so he doesn't really like taking certain risks, especially in midfield.
Do you expect this blip for Bayern to mean anything for the Bundesliga table? It's a 6-point gap to Dortmund. It's not unbridgeable, if that's even a word.
No, it isn't. It isn't. It's attainable for Dortmund, but I think it's how much of it is dependent on Bayern's squad currently being decimated. And by March, let's say, by the time the Champions League knockouts come around, I think they'll be right. And I just think they're far too good. The Bundesliga and the Premier League, out of the top five, they're probably the two most lopsided in the top five. Bayern is just utterly dominant in the same way that Manchester City and Liverpool are in relation to the rest of the league. Yeah, I think the Bundesliga title's a foregone conclusion despite this blip.
And you think Bayern will be in a good spot when the Champions League knockout rounds really heat up?
That's an interesting one, though, because, so much in the Champions League knockouts is dependent on matchup. And that was something you kind of saw, last season in the Champions League, especially with relation to that reliance on Lewandowski and Muller. When one was out, there's a lot of slack that others have to pick up, which they might not have the capacity to do, despite the hype and the praise for the likes of Joshua Kimmich in midfield, for example, and the likes of Gnabry, the likes of Leroy Sané, even going back to when they won the Champions League, the likes of Perisic, Coutinho, they were all complementary to that, that basis of Lewandowski and Muller creating space for everyone else. And another example, Leon Goretzka being able to make those late entries into the penalty area and not having to carry, not having to do the heavy lifting in terms of build up in earlier phases of play. Yeah, with respect to Europe, I'm unsure what Bayern's ceiling is, but I think they're just far too good in Germany.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all saw that coming, but a bit of concern trolling at midpoint in the season is always a bit of fun. Before we move on for Germany, just have to say that touch and finish from Lewandowski and the combination with Muller was breathtaking, and it really gave me a deep sense of satisfaction to my 14-year-old former number 9 self, because that touch, the little back heel behind your own leg to turn the defender, was something I attempted countless fruitless times as an ineffectual striker at action indoor sports, and just once it came off of me, just once, gloriously.
But that one time, that's enough to hang your hat on.
It was actually a fluke, because I hit it way too hard and it hit the side netting and it looped up off the net, and then I volleyed it in and I just played it off like I meant it. And it was a rock star moment, but action indoor sports very forgiving as opposed to the real sport of futsal. Anyway, we'll go to a quick break. On the other side, a bit of chat about Madrid, Barcelona and La Liga before we sign off here on the Euro Show on FNR.
Ever wanted a career in football? From TV deals to player transfers, football is now a global multi-billion-dollar industry in need of qualified professionals who know the sport inside and out. Brought to you by the Global Institute of Sport, the Masters of Football Business is delivered by experts from Australia and around the world. Learn online with unique access to networking and guest speaker events at the iconic MCG. Be one of the first Australians to get a football master's degree. Apply now to start in February 2022. Learn more at gis.sport/FNR. gis.sport/FNR.
Since 1998, Lanco Group has been providing superior civil engineering solutions and advice to developers, local government and service authorities across Australia. Lanco Group is known for delivering sustainable, efficient solutions. By working closely with clients, Lanco Group is able to meet the complex infrastructure requirements for residential, commercial and industrial developments on time, on budget. Find out more at lancogroup.com.au. Lanco Group, your business partner for engineering solutions.
Launch your global career in football business. Study a master's degree online with unique access to the MCG and a big-hitting Australian industry network. Brought to you by the Global Institute of Sport, who also have campuses at the iconic Wembley Stadium in London and Etihad Stadium in Manchester. Be one of the first Australians to get a football master's degree and join GIS's global network of football leaders. Apply now to start in February 2022. Learn more at gis.sport/FNR. That's gis.sport/FNR.
Sometimes I feel, I don't know.
Buona giornata, buona serata, buona giornata.
There's not really time to relax and take an espresso for Juventus.
You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? Attaccare! Attaccare!
And we're back for the final time here on the Euro Show for this Monday evening. Josh Parrish and Ante Jukic. Nick Debano will be back in this spot next week. But until he is, we've got some La Liga to talk about. Real Madrid 4, Valencia 1. Another 2 goals from Karim Benzema. Another 2 goals from the fast improving Vinny Jr. living up to his hefty teenage price tag. And another masterclass from the professor, Luka Modric. Real Madrid in pole position in La Liga and keeping on doing the things that this midfield trio and this striker have done for many, many years now. Is continuity underrated in football, aren't they? These players just so familiar, it just hand fits into the glove.
Smart midfielders are underrated, not just continuity. And like that's the one thing that just is mind-blowing with respect to the inability to answer why Real Madrid have been so sustainable since Ronaldo's departure. This is the greatest, like it's only now people realize this is the greatest midfield possibly in the history of club football. I believe it is. In relation to, let's say, that 2011, Barcelona team, people might say that, and that's fair enough. And I'd probably get some vehement disagreement in respect to that. But I think this is the greatest midfield of all time in club football. And watching Modric and Benzema play together, like the world will be worse off when we don't get to watch that any longer. Especially, when you do have Guardiola's and Conte's and Klopp's automatism, like you have it's just the purest form of football there is. It's just improvisation, a lot of riffing off each other, understanding between players as opposed to, players having decisions made for them, through structures that are drummed into them. It's just so great to watch Benzema and Modric play together. And you kind of have to view Vinicius's rapid rate of improvement partly within that prism. Vinicius in isolation, he reminds me of Frank Ribery. And even the way in which he starts his dribble, like he's just really dynamic. But there's just going to be one season. I thought it was going to come later than this, but like there's going to be a season where he's just going to go bonkers. And this season is it, by the looks of things. I'm unsure if this is sustainable over the course of his, still fledgling career. But you still have to view it within the prism of that midfield and how Benzema relates to that midfield. And Madrid are just really great to watch. However much Ancelotti is, having them run on fumes.
The curious thing about this Madrid group and that midfield and Benzema up front, it seems the more you try to coach them, the less well they respond. You've got to roll the ball out and play, man. Like,
just let them play.
Yeah. Like, I'm just thinking of Zinedine Zidane just clap your hands manager on the touchline, or Carlo Ancelotti standing there aloof with one eyebrow raised and not really impacting the game too much or telling anybody what to do, in comparison to, say, I don't know, Rafa Benitez's ill-fated stint in charge where he tried to get Luka Modric to stop using the outside of his boot and got laughed out of it.
It's not just that. Like you think about the much heralded players who they thought would replace players in this midfield. Like an Isco, like Dani Ceballos, like Fede Valverde in 2018-19, and he still hasn't been able to kind of embed himself in the starting lineup. Martin Odegaard, another example. Even this season with Camavinga, they just can't, like, to quote the Guardiola, you cannot replace them. Like, they just can't be replaced. What they do is just so unique in terms of how they feel going through. And that's the thing about Modric and Benzema specifically. They have such an innate understanding of what the game requires at very specific moments over the course of the game. They feel games through like no other players in their position, like I've frankly ever seen. It's going to suck when they no longer play football together.
Well, trying desperately to keep pace with them is not FC Barcelona. They are well off it, but in fact...
Because Frankie de Jong sucks.
I'm just going to let that drive-by go. But Sevilla, under former Madrid boss, of course, Julian Lopetegui, they've got a pretty compelling lineup, a very attractive young centre-half in Jules Koundé, playing the ball out from the back with confidence. Papu Gomez, the wily veteran, contributing. But they're not so much the Atalanta thrill ride where Papu Gomez starred in previous. They're just doing enough to get the points.
You know what? Speaking of Barca and how everything's kind of fallen off the rails for them, and people were talking about Messi, or that coming as a consequence of Messi's departure and the like. His two greatest or most compatible partners outside of Iniesta, once Iniesta left, his two most compatible partners have allowed for, one, Atletico Madrid to win the title last season, and two, Sevilla reaching their greatest points total in history last season and pushing Atletico Madrid to the title, like all the way until the end of April. Getting a higher points total than the famed team of 2007 that lost in the final stages of the season. But this year, pushing Real Madrid to the title. And everyone was saying a couple of weeks ago, Madrid's going to, win this in a canter. Suddenly, Sevilla have caught them in the blink of an eye, and, they could be within a win with a game in hand. It's to watch. They have a lot of really, they have a depth to their squad, but they're used in really practical ways. Sevilla are kind of playing in the way that everyone expected of Atletico Madrid this season. And Sevilla have been the team that has been more practical. Last season, before Papu Gomez was signed, they were very reliant on Jukic. And even now, especially like this weekend, for example, against Getafe, they weren't jumping off the screen, to use the expression, but they did enough. And that's kind of the description that we always attributed to Diego Simeone and Atleti. But
13 goals conceded in 20 games compared to Atletico's 24.
Yeah.
So
they have. Sorry.
What happened to Cholismo? What happened to Huevos?
They don't. The thing about Simeone, he was at least certain who was going to be the one creative fulcrum for them, and everyone would apply to that. Whereas this season, he doesn't know whether to play with Suarez, he doesn't know whether to play with Griezmann, he doesn't know whether to play with João Felix. Plus, you've got Rodrigo de Paul, in midfield, and he's a very un-Cholo Simeone midfielder. Irrespective of the fact that he's still primarily a transition player, he's still very expressive and not primarily defensive in the way that, the likes of Koke or Gabi were, for example, or even a Raul Garcia, for example. But yeah, I think Sevilla is strong across the board. They don't have great players, but they have good to very good players in the likes of Jean Jordan, in Fernando, in Jules Koundé. Even Rakitic and Papu Gomez can be applied to that as well. Lucas Ocampos, who in the same way that Chiesa, gives his teams that bull in a china shop outlet, he applies that to he's that outlet for Sevilla as well. So they're just a strong squad, and especially in a time where the Spanish league is, arguably at its weakest over the past decade, they've got just enough scope to push Real Madrid to the title this season.
Controversial opinion potentially here, but I think it might be time for Diego to move on from Atleti. I think to go to the next level with this club and their finances and what they're doing in the transfer market to try and further this team, because on paper their transfer dealings looked really good in a kind of football manager wheeler dealer sense, but they've got a manager who's stuck in the way he used to play, and to go to the next level, I think they need a more adventurous coach.
This is a difficult one, because I don't think there is a coach in European football that embodies a club or an identity in the way that Diego Simeone does. So would dismissing him create this
I don't think
vacuum?
you can sack him. I don't think you can sack him. It needs to be a mutual parting of ways. I think Diego needs to see the next opportunity, maybe in Serie A. Maybe, the Inter job would have been ideal, but Inzaghi's doing quite well there, so maybe the timing isn't right. But I wonder whether Atleti, in the way the club ownership clearly sees themselves as part of European football's elite, demands an evolution that they're not going to get.
And at the same time, I've spoken to you about this a lot, but I think, there is a fundamental misinterpretation with what constitutes functional football teams and how Europe's elite, responds to that within the prism of that misinterpretation. It's, Juve over the past 3 years have been the greatest example of that, their inability to understand what made them good. And could that potentially exist with Atleti is the question that I would have in relation to, Simeone's tenure.
Or they zag the other way completely and they sell a bunch of these players for profit and they double down on just shithousery and the dark arts. Because they seem to be in this in-between stage where the sporting direction of the club doesn't quite seem in line with the coach. He's got so many weapons and he doesn't know how to use them. And that's actually, although they got smacked on the weekend by Real Madrid because, it's Real Madrid and there's always going to be a ceiling when you play against good midfields. That's been the most interesting thing about Valencia this season, because I think they've openly embraced the shithousery that Bordalas provides. And it worked for Getafe. And there are players there who have completely bought in. And, when Getafe played against Real Madrid under Bordalas, there was always going to be, they could only do so much against how Real Madrid could keep the ball. But that's actually been one interesting thing to see about Valencia, irrespective of, the soap opera that is, the Peter Lim ownership and, the pitch battles that they have to run with the club's fans. I'm really unsure coming back to Atleti how this is all going to play out, but it's fascinating to see how it's going to play out. Last Spanish football item before we close the show, Ante. I just want to read this Comunicado Oficial in full. Real Betis has always been absolutely respectful with the referees and their decisions, but what we have seen today is incomprehensible. This is from the official club account. The job of a referee is to be fair and just, not the disgrace we have seen today at Vallecas. A mistake is understandable, but one error after another, all in the same direction, damaging the rules, cannot be understood. Alex Moreno's red card, a handball inside the home area, foul before the goal and foul from Carvalho when he was alone. There is no possible explanation. Are they alleging match fixing here? Jude Bellingham did much the same for Dortmund. Can they sanction the whole club?
especially against a club like Vallecano, which is so anti-establishment. Like, to claim match fixing or to claim, a certain untoward, management of the game to benefit a club like Rayo Vallecano is just absurd, but absurd in a fun and comedic kind of way that Spanish football can only provide. However, it's just in continuation with the idea that you just always watch Betis.
Whatever comes. Yeah, look, those kind of free-thinking hippie types over at Vallecas really are enmeshing themselves with the Madrid elite,
Those damn Republicans. They're just got some new money, and they've been able to mold with the old money, and now they're just getting matches fixed for them.
Not since Hume City's shame post, their Game of Thrones themed refereeing post in the MPL Vic last season, have I seen such disregard for the norms of football and social media and referees. It's just an extraordinary thing that crossed my feed. I thought, this cannot be real. This cannot be the real account, but there you go. The verified tick is right there. Anyway, Ante, it's been an absolute pleasure to have your company on today's return of the Euro Show. We've gone a little bit over time, as we are wont to do here.
Not exactly a surprise.
But we had a lot to cover after our break over Christmas, so that's understandable. Ante, I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Ciao.
Ciao.
Buon giornata.
Sometimes I feel, I don't know.
Buona giornata, buona serata, buona giornata.
There's not really time to relax and take an espresso for Juventus.
You thought I forgot about you, didn't you? Attaccare!